Apology Day. An apology, it's not about guilt, recriminations, blame. It is about actually a recognition of one of the ethos of Rotary International, which is respect to humanity, respect for humanity, past generations and future. The past sadness is ever present and recurring in people's lives. And this can be addressed not only through the word sorry, but with an open heart and mind, an understanding of how events happen, and commit towards reconciliation. It is about a reconciled Australia, where all Australians feel they belong within a shared past and a brighter future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Rotarians and guests, I give a toast to Australia and Rotary International. Australia, Rotary International. Thank you, and please be seated. So we're now breaking for lunch, and we'll reconvene around 1:10 p.m. And for those of you who are online, take up the offer of the Zoom breakout rooms, which will open shortly. Thank you. Well, members, visitors and guests, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to our 28th meeting of this Rotary year and our 4,971st club meeting in our 102nd year. And it's only 14 weeks until the Rotary International Convention is here in Melbourne. Our guest speaker today is Nerita Waite, CEO of the Aboriginal Legal Service. Nerita will be speaking on Indigenous justice issues and will be more formally introduced by our Chair of the Day, Rob McGurk. In the meantime, would you please join me in making them both welcome? We have a number of visitors here today as well, and when I announce your name, please stand and remain standing so our club can welcome you in our traditional manner. We have visiting Rotarians Teresa Mitchell, who's the President of the Rotary Club of Warrigal. We also have Natalie Hour, who, I understand, Natalie, you've just been inducted in the last week at Rotary Club, or very recently Rotary Club of Preston, last year, so welcome, Natalie. We have Andre Martinovici, who's here with the camera as well, taking photos, a guest of Ramona. We have Jacqueline Koo, and we also have Wendy Dawson, who's a guest of Teresa as well. So would you please join me in making all of our guests welcome? Now, I don't want to alarm anyone by announcing this, but AFL footy season is not far away. And any member of our club would know what that means. It means that Bruce Davidson's on his way up to the podium to launch the club's footy tipping competition. Welcome, Bruce.
Thank you, Adrian. This is very preliminary. I'm going to go easy on you, really. I just want to tell you about why we run the footy tipping. It raises over $2,000 for the Health and Ageing Committee. They've been running a project to take isolated people away down the peninsula for a Christmas lunch every Christmas for at least 2 decades. I think it might be nearly 3 now, and it needs to be funded. The prices of doing this are going up, of course, and the interest in footy tipping, I think, is waning just a little bit. So our tipping competition is set up in such a way that we can make $2,000 easily if we get 100 tippers. If we get more than 100 tippers, we make more money. It's $40 per head. You can do the maths. It's pretty easy. But this is a signature project of the club that's been going on for a long, long time. So I'm not asking you to start supporting a club and get interested in AFL footy. I'm asking you to get involved in a club fundraiser. Now, I know that if you're a member of the Rotary Club of Melbourne, you know the club's always got their hand out for something. But this is just a miserable $40. $40. Just do it once. Now, I'm not even asking you to get involved. You might be bored by AFL. I'm not. I'm interested. But some people aren't. Well, don't sign yourself up. Sign your neighbour up. Sign your grandkids up. Sign your wife up. Sign up anybody who's interested in AFL footy and put the $40 in and sign up your dog. Let me tell you, that Peter has signed up his dog for the last 5 years and even won prizes. They've even won, Duke won a prize. I remember that, see? And Deb's cat won a prize as well. There you are. So you can sign up your cat. What I'm asking you to do is to be involved. $40, find somebody who's interested in the footy tipping and give them a subscription. Now that's going to boost your friendship. They're going to think you're great and you're going to be supporting the club and a great project. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. A number of members are celebrating significant membership anniversaries this week. Rodney Smith, 39 years, Max Barr, 40 years. But one member here today is Ron Cullen, who this week celebrates 40 years of membership and service to our club. And we thought we'd take this time to remind you of his background professionally and in Rotary. So Ron was born just prior to World War II, educated at Melbourne High and Melbourne University, where he took his Bachelor of Engineering in Electrical Engineering in 1962, completed his Master of Business Administration in 1968, with a Bachelor of Commerce in between, and then lectured in the Melbourne Business School until 1973, when he gained his doctorate in philosophy, the second to be granted by the school. He was nominated for membership of the club by Ken Green, Secretary of the Premier's Department. He was then in his third year as the most innovative chairman of the Public Service Board, introducing strategic performance agreements, performance evaluation and performance payment. Although, as he reminds us, he is an engineer, Ron became inaugural Director of Finance of Telecom and was New South Wales State Manager of Telecom when headhunted by Victoria for the Public Service Board. From 1987 to 93, he was Chairman of the Victorian Post-Secondary Commission, set up to facilitate the major changes in higher education over that period. At this time, he was a member of the Council of the University and of the Board of the Business School. He retired in 1993 and set up Performance Management Solutions to assist the public service to measure and improve performance, and has critically advised all governments in Australia. From the outset, Ron was an active member contributing to the club's committee work. After brief stints in our reception and Rotaract committees, he made vocational service a main interest, culminating in the chairmanship from 2001 to 2003. In 2005 to 07, he was board director overseeing our vocational services and was responsible for our vocational issues panels, which continue today. He's also served on the International Fellowship, Program Health Issues and the Audit Committees. Since 2008, Ron was a member of the Community Welfare Committee, culminating as chairman to 2015. As a member of that committee, he was responsible for the not-for-profit advisory group, the Lighthouse Foundation, and the Sir John Reid Community Service Award, as well as being active on the Family Violence Committee. Ron was named a Paul Harris Fellow by the Rotary Club of Melbourne in 2007, and for continuous dedication to the activities of this club in our local community, awarded a Sapphire Paul Harris Fellow in 2017. Happy 40th anniversary, Ron. I'm also delighted to see Professor Jeremy Oates here today. Jeremy will be recognised with Rotary's highest honour, the Service Above Self Award, at the International Convention in May. He joins past Rotary Melbourne awardees George Tippett, Mev Connell, Bob Glendeman, and Ruth Carlos Martinez, who gave today's reflection. The award recognises Rotarians who demonstrate Rotary's motto, service above self, by volunteering their time and talents to help others. The reward is internationally competitive and is granted to a small number of Rotarians worldwide. Jeremy is a leading obstetrics and gynaecology practitioner and a distinguished academic. And from 2011, Jeremy has led 17 volunteer vocational training team visits to remote regions of Timor-Leste to deliver upskill training to 360 midwife and nurses and 162 doctors. His expert team of medical and midwifery specialists deliver presentations and practical demonstrations through interpreters in local language. Jeremy has done significant work to develop and translate training and trainer programs. So great to see you back, Jeremy. Now, last Wednesday, in lieu of our evening meeting, we actually went down to our Rotary Park of Remembrance on the corner of Domain Street and Anderson Street in South Yarra to have a wonderful picnic in the park, which was attended by over 30 members. It was a fantastic event where we heard from Neil McLaughlin, who is the artist, designer and builder of the Rotary Peace Bells, which are going to be installed in the park and launched at the Rotary International Convention in May. It was a fantastic day. We would love to see more members involved and visiting Rotary Park whenever you can. And in coming weeks, we'll be talking about where our fundraising efforts currently sit and be talking to you about where we can just push ourselves over the line for the last part of this really important Rotary International project. And speaking of the Rotary International Convention, as I've mentioned in the past and we've seen in our club's bulletin, we'll be having a special event on the Sunday, the 28th of May, which is the Sunday night of the convention, where our club will be hosting the sister clubs and other friendship clubs that we have from around the world. And we really want as many of our members to be there as possible, and it's going to be a great event. What I'm delighted to announce today, after a number of sort of months working to lock in the venue, I'll be pleased to announce that we'll actually be holding this cocktail party at the Windsor Hotel, which will be a fantastic spot to remind us of some great traditions that we've had there in the past, and also to highlight to our international visitors marvellous Melbourne and some great historic events. So when we send out the tickets and we have the website available for booking, we really like to see all of our members there and any friends that you might have as well. So with that, the last thing I need to do is announce that we're not drawing a raffle today. So there's no raffle today. So that means next week will be even bigger and better. And it gives more time to introduce our chair of the day and hand over the meeting to Rob McGurk to further introduce our guest speaker. Thank you very much.
Thanks, President Adrian. It gives me great pleasure today to introduce our speaker, Nerita Waite. Nerita is a Yorta Yorta and Wiradjuri woman with Tangaroon connections. She's the CEO of the Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service and has worked in family and children's law. She helped to expand the service's policy and advocacy work, most notably establishing a holistic and culturally safe legal service for Aboriginal children. Nerita has also overseen the establishment of the Wirraway Police and Prison Accountability Practice, which has supported clients in Aboriginal death in custody cases, including most recently Uncle Percy Lovett, the partner of Veronica Nelson during the recent coronial inquest. As a mother of two young boys, Nerita has a key motivation for her work to ensure that they grow up with strong connections to their culture and kin and in a world that is safe for Aboriginal people. Nerita previously appeared on the Indigenous Reconciliation breakout session for our Rotary Melbourne Peace Symposium in April 2021 as part of our 100-year anniversary celebrations. Nerita was on the panel with Ian Ham and Neville White, and I was the moderator for that session. So it's with great pleasure we have her back again. We can see her again here and look forward to hearing her talk today about Indigenous justice issues. Thanks, Nerita.
Apologies, didn't want to be stealing somebody's state secrets there. As stated, my name's Nerita Waite. I'm a proud Yorta Yorta Wiradjuri woman with Tangaroon connections, and I'm very grateful for the Rotary Club of Melbourne for inviting me to speak today to share some of my experiences of the systems that continue to harm Aboriginal people. I also might be calling on President Adrian to borrow Bruce's rather rousing calls for fundraising. I could do with that in my organisation each and every day. Not a problem. Some of my speech will touch on truths that many Australians find hard to listen to, let alone accept. But I'll also be discussing the great work that VALS does to help address the legacy of those truths and build a better future for our people and everyone who now lives on these lands. Every day since the arrival of the British Empire over 230 years ago, our people have suffered under structures and systems of colonisation. When the British Empire invaded this land, they declared it terra nullius, which means unoccupied by the humans. This was despite almost 1 million Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people living in Australia at that time. Unfortunately, our latest 2021 census results show that there's just under 900,000 Aboriginal people residing in Australia today. So while much of the world's population was booming with industrialisation and globalisation, we were often fighting to survive against a system that wanted to eradicate us. Recent research has identified 400 massacres in Australia. The legal system has been particularly problematic because it didn't provide any justice for us then, and it certainly is a difficult system to navigate now. Once the fighting stopped, then came the era termed by the Australian lawmakers as assimilation. This is an era that my grandmother and my great-grandmother lived through, a policy which most notably enforced the forcible removal of our children in the stolen generations. Our cultures and our traditions were intentionally stripped. Our people were subjected to abuse, all enabled by the legal system. It took almost 180 years before we were properly recognised as citizens. At that time, my mum, born in 1962, was 5. My grandmother, unfortunately, died before she could see that recognition. It took over 200 years for terra nullius to be overturned, with the Mabo decision recognising our people's continuing connection with and rights to land. But heavy-handed government policymaking continues to control our lives today. While we have seen attempts at the reshaping of relationships between Aboriginal and non-Indigenous people in Australia, these attempts will not be successful while we continue to be the most incarcerated people on the world and while Aboriginal children continue removed from their families, their communities and their culture. We're still in a crisis. We are still over-policed, over-incarcerated, and we still continue to die in custody. Addressing these issues is essential to any effort to reconcile Australia's colonial past. VALS was established so that we could rely on our own strengths and create a space for community, culture and empowerment. Our organisation is not for profit and it's one of the oldest community legal services in Australia. It is 50, not me. And self-determination is the core at VALS. That means that we have an all Aboriginal member base. All of our board of directors are Aboriginal. And they are the ones that work with the community to dictate what our services do, not just in the future, but each and every day. We've unfortunately always required help to deliver our services through funding because our communities often cannot afford to pay for legal services. We think that governments have a responsibility to properly fund Aboriginal legal services because they have created the circumstances that have necessitated our existence. We would like not to need to exist, but unfortunately we do. As an organisation, we are at our best when we are connected to community. We want to build our local office network so that we are more embedded in our communities to deliver the legal services our people deserve at the earliest point. It's also important because every Aboriginal community has different legal issues. Some are just struggling with issues like child protection. Some are struggling more with issues such as youth justice, so, graffiti, property offences, struggling to get children to stay at school because of issues such as racism, issues such as conflict within communities. They need those sorts of services. Others, of course, need our full suite offering. That means criminal law services, means family and child protection, means family violence intervention orders, but it also unfortunately means often our police accountability unit as well as our death in custody practice. Positively, we opened an office in Warrnambool last year, which my son was incredibly excited for because it meant he got to be in the car for 5 hours with his iPad. Not that I recommend such an action. We are soon to open our new office in Bendigo next Friday. Again, I'm thinking he's counting on going to that for his iPad as well. These offices will be a fantastic resource for their communities. There's a lot of talk and political debate about making communities safer and stronger. Often this is done through bids of $2 billion, which show little effect or positive moves in community safety. Our officers and our outcomes show that 97% of our clients are happy with our services. 97% of our clients feel as though we've helped them avoid a future contact with the criminal legal system. And many of them feel as though we've been able to educate them on their legal rights to avoid any other interaction with the legal system. Part of this is because we just don't do legal services. We do more than that. We have our community justice program. That's an all Aboriginal staff who work with community in various ways. The first instance is through our custodification service. That's a 24/7 program we run that when an Aboriginal person is arrested by police, we're notified and we're able to give those Aboriginal people access to legal services, but also ensure that we know what their health issues are, they've got appropriate health care, we can contact their family to tell them where they are, all of those essential things. We also can make sure that a client, once they are released from police, have a safe way home via transport. Our CSOs are famous for rocking up at any police station any time of the night to help somebody get home safely. And then rocking up to make sure that they've got food in their fridge, that their children are safe, and that they feel as though they're empowered to move forward. This means that even though we only had 11,836 notifications, we made over 70,000 interactions with clients. That means phone calls and in-person contact to address those 11,000 clients. The Bag Group program is another excellent way that we support community. That provides a supported transition process for women exiting Dame Phyllis Frost and Tarrangale, which are our two women's prisons here in Victoria. It means that they just don't leave prison with $10 on a Met card. Instead, they're provided with housing, they're provided with case management to address the issues that have led them to where they are today. And often, these women are victims of family violence, they're victims of coercive control. Many of the times they've been incarcerated because they continue to commit offences of desperation. That means shop steal. That means they're just trying to put food on the table, or often, unfortunately, they're being blamed for offences as a result of that family violence relationship. We're lucky to say that through that Bag Group program, we've been able to transition each and every Aboriginal woman to stable long-term housing. We've also been able to assist them to connect to their families, but most importantly, resume their caregiving responsibilities for their children and young people. And none of them have returned to the care of the state. We also have our Aboriginal families practice, which works with our community justice teams to ensure that the needs of Aboriginal families and children are met. This is hard work, it's not easy. We also, through our Wirraway Prison and Police Accountability practice, work on many police complaints and death in custody matters. This year, one of those matters, the tragic coronal inquest into the passing of Veronica Nelson, brought to society's attention the issues of systemic racism, prison healthcare, policing and bail laws, to the dedication of Veronica's family and loved ones. I would like to say that's the only matter that we have, but we start another inquest next week, and the month after that, and the month after that, and the month after that. Too often, the outcomes of those inquests are not followed through with. So what we try to do, make our point of difference, is to make sure that we don't just cease our contact with the family after those findings and recommendations have been handed down. We work with those families to make sure those recommendations and findings are implemented so we create a safer justice system for everyone. Talking of safety, bail reform. The current bail laws in Victoria are destroying lives, families and communities. The current laws were implemented in 2017-18 in reaction to some extreme cases which showed very poor decision making. In just a few short years, these laws have proved that hard cases make bad law. In Victoria, the Aboriginal imprisonment rate has almost doubled in the last 10 years, and about half of the prison population is on remand. Many of the 3,000 people being held on remand are unlikely to get a prison sentence if they are found guilty of the charges that have been laid against them. The current bail laws don't respect the right to the presumption of innocence. They work against that. They prove also that Victoria's justice system right now is focused on retribution rather than rehabilitation or community safety. Victoria's harmful bail laws have the most detrimental effect on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women. who are often remanded from minor offences that, if found guilty, won't mean prison time for them. This has devastating impacts on Aboriginal families and communities, as women are often the primary caregivers. And I don't think this is new to women anywhere. The government has known that there's a significant problem with the Bail Act for years. They didn't ask, but we and many others in the sector told them time and time again. 2 weeks ago, the coroner delivered their findings into the passing of Veronica Nelson and stated that current bail laws are, quote, a complete unmitigated disaster. He was being kind. While the government has subsequently committed to reforming these bail laws, we can't wait around and let another Aboriginal person die in a police cell, nor anybody else. Many people won't know that whilst attention is paid to Veronica Nelson, there are two other women who died at DPSC. One was an Aboriginal woman by the name of Heather Calgarrett. Another was a non-Aboriginal woman who unfortunately died whilst in early labour. Her baby passed as well. We need to fix these laws. This might surprise many of you, but children are treated just like adults when it comes to the bail law system. It's a really unfair situation contributing to the over-incarceration of Aboriginal children, and especially the trap of bail offences. That means, like in the case of a matter we dealt with last week, where a child in residential care was charged with offences relating to taking food from the fridge because he was hungry. He was charged with theft. Unfortunately, he was already on bail for offences relating to theft, again, of food. But because he committed this alleged theft, whilst he was already on bail, that means he got lifted to the exceptional circumstances test. Inevitably, they're held on remand and spend a long time there waiting for their court date due to court. It also disrupts their ability to engage in education, in therapeutic supports, ability to engage in culture, kin and community, and disrupts any hope of reunification. Another troubling aspect of our work is oversight and accountability. For the 520 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who've died in custody since the Royal Commission handed down its findings over 30 years ago, when I was 5, nobody's been held criminally liable, which is unacceptable. We work to put an end to the expansion of prisons in Victoria and a commitment to a target to reduce the prison population to 0. While we're walking to that future, though, we still need to engage in mitigation. So we're pushing the Victorian Government to strengthen accountability and oversight, including through independent detention oversight, independent investigation of deaths in custody, and establishing independent, robust and culturally appropriate police and prison complaint systems. This will create a fairer system for everybody. 15 years ago this week, the Australian Parliament said sorry to the stolen generations. Sadly, the forcible removal of our children continues today. It's not distant history, but rather an ongoing crisis. We witness the impacts of the child protection system in all parts of our work. Lawyers in our family practice take on child protection matters, acting for both children and parents. Our criminal practice and specialist youth practice, Balit Nalu, frequently act for crossover kids. Those are children who engage in both the child protection system as well as youth justice. Our specialist litigation practice, Wirraway, supports police complaints and litigation emerging from the mistreatment of Aboriginal children in the child protection system, and sadly, they also act into the deaths of children known to child protection. Many of the adult clients of our criminal practice have a history of involvement with and neglect by the child protection system during their youth. Our CJP programs frequently report families and children who are struggling to be fairly treated by child protection. In 2020-21, 10.9% of the Aboriginal children under 1 in Victoria were removed from their parents and placed in out-of-home care. Removals, of course, today don't involve outright deception or total isolation from family and culture, but that does not change the reality that many Aboriginal people know members of community who have experienced removal in their own generation, their parents' generation, and their grandparents' generation. I'm no exception to that. Every injustice perpetrated on Aboriginal people by today's child protection system is experienced as part of an unbroken line, something that doesn't go back just to the stolen generations, but goes right back to the moment of colonisation. From most parts of these work, it's clear that the child protection system, far from rectifying the policies of its history, continues to inflict severe injustices. Whilst we're unable to wave a magic wand, and trust me, we've tried to locate one, we are able to utilise our resources to assist children and young people have a voice as they move through this often unfeeling and unthinking system. In 2017, we We established Bulitnalu, which means strong voice. It provides a mechanism for Aboriginal children and young people to be represented in their youth justice matters, but also to be provided with a dedicated client support worker to help them self-determine a future where they are safe, where they are strong, where they are on their way to a thriving future. Working at Bulitnalu isn't the easiest. Each and every day we're confronted with the complexity of so-called crossover children. This is arguably the most vulnerable group of children in Victoria, and the interaction of these two systems should be carefully tailored to provide individualised support to protect children's development and improve their life chances. Aboriginal children are also disproportionately likely to be crossover children and to be exposed to the harmful effects of the system, which does not do enough to protect young people. In fact, more than half of Aboriginal children in the youth justice system have current or previous child protection orders, compared to around 38% of the overall population in the youth justice system. Contact with the child protection system almost always precedes with contact with youth justice. 98% of crossover children who experience residential care had been known to child protection service before offending, and 74% had only committed their first offence after being placed in residential care. Younger children in the youth justice system were more likely to be crossover children than older children, and this is particularly the case for Aboriginal children. The easiest way to explain the interaction between child protection and justice is by case example. So let's take H. H is a VALS client who was known to child protection from his infancy. He was removed from his parents twice in the first 18 months of his life, and in 2019 he was sentenced to a significant term of imprisonment. Tragically, despite the government having oversight of H's upbringing for his entire childhood, he lived in an environment of emotional abuse, physical neglect and domestic violence for the first 3 years of his life. He was in foster care and had no contact with his father and only sporadic contact with his mother. H's experience of the child protection system was on itself a major source of trauma, in his own words. He said that he lived with one foster carer from his removal aged 3 until adulthood, and at least he had a roof over his head and access to food, even though nobody cared. He said that he continued to suffer from the effects of his traumatic childhood, and this played out at school, where he would present with anger and behavioural difficulties. He would often run away from his home on several occasions and would often go out sleeping rough. That means sleeping on the streets, for those that don't know. Unfortunately, he began using alcohol and drugs at age 13. His substance use steadily became worse and worse and had mental health effects like psychotic episodes and intrusive paranoid thoughts. He left his foster home for the last time at 19. He became homeless. He said that he never received the active guidance of a good parent. He doesn't know what a good parent looks like. He's not sure they exist. Certain behaviour was forbidden without the kind of explanation that allowed him to understand independent living. He found himself exiting care without knowing how to cook or shop for food or how to find or hold a job. A worker who was meant to submit an application for housing for H never did so. By the time he left care, he said that he had no idea what services were available to him and would likely have struggled to engage with them given his previous experience. His severe personality disorder was only diagnosed by expert witnesses far too late at his sentencing hearing. He had previously been admitted to hospital in relation to drug-induced psychotic episodes as a child, but still, no treatment was provided. After 18 years in the child protection system, H exited into the homelessness with an undiagnosed severe personality disorder, unaddressed substance abuse issues, and significant unresolved trauma from his childhood, which led him right to the doors of the prison. Cases such as this highlight why crossover between these two systems is to be expected, since the traumatic circumstances which bring children to the attention of child protection often go unaddressed and untreated. At the moment on our books, we have a number of children in residential care who are being criminalised for self-harm attempts. That means that they're being charged with property damage as a result of those harm attempts. They're not provided with counselling or mental health supports. They're not provided with intensive case management. They're not provided with greater access to culture or kin. They're not even supported to go to school. Unfortunately, care providers in the state not acting as if they are parents is common, and certainly the Commission for Children and Young People has documented these cases. The Sentencing Advisory Council has also noted that police are often called more than they would be by parents because of things that ordinarily they would expect them to deal with, which indicate to them that many staff do not have the skills, training or temperament to care for highly vulnerable children whose behaviour patterns cannot be easily changed after 1 or 2 incidences. And with a lifetime of trauma and abuse, how can you expect them to? Working with vulnerable and traumatised children with complex needs requires extensive training and qualifications, and on-the-job training is not adequate to prepare staff for that type of work. At present, these staff are underqualified, under-supported. They're also underpaid, which means often they're not supported to go and increase their qualifications, which would then increase their worth. Because of this, we see high turnover, which means that kids don't actually have a constant worker or a constant therapist or a constant foster carer. They're constantly interchange. While inappropriate calls to police by care providers are a major part of the problem, police could also do better. Call-outs to residential care units are handled by local police stations, and their competence in handling these calls is variable at best. Section 3.5 of the Children, Youth and Families Act establishes a presumption that police should proceed by summons rather than arrest when dealing with children. But at some stations, that presumption is forgotten. Youth support officers, often enough, have no knowledge of children's cases or engagement with charges laid against them, and an inability to follow up. As a result, police involvement with children in residential care can often escalate the situation rather than helping to manage it. Police efforts at de-escalation are frequently very limited, and officers will rapidly move from a brief attempt at de-escalation to making an arrest. This is particularly true when we're dealing with self-harm. The experience of Aboriginal children served by VALS lawyers include police attending a residential care unit several hours after a call, by which time the situation had de-escalated and there was no ongoing risk. Police still persisted and made arrest. Police making arrests solely for charges that are preceded by policing, such as resisting arrests. Use of extreme and excessive force when making arrests, including placing children in chokeholds and taking them to the ground. Attending police officers using degrading language towards children, given their circumstances of being in care and being Black. The experience of VALS lawyers is that charges relating to underlying behaviour, such as property damage, which led to police being called, are almost always dropped. The only charges which proceed are those such as resisting arrest. Many of these charges could be avoided by more appropriate police conduct when called to residential care. In February 2020, the Victorian Government acknowledged this issue and published its framework to reduce criminalisation of young people in residential care. This is a positive document which establishes principles for avoiding criminalisation of children in care. Its implementation has been lacking. VALS continues to see children being policed and charged because their behaviour in residential care is criminalised. There is no regional implementation of this plan. There is no statewide implementation of this plan. There is no oversight. Despite the fact that this framework includes decision-making guides for residential care workers, which provides police response can only be considered after other de-escalation strategies have been attempted, and that a police response is appropriate, given it could lead to a substantial risk of harm, this is still not well understood. And children are still having police called on them. From last week was taking milk from a fridge, the week before was food, and the weeks prior have largely been around self-harm. I thought to take you through the case study of R. R's an Aboriginal child who's living in residential care. He was born with a substance dependence and has been diagnosed with a number of neurodevelopmental disorders and mental health issues. He's experienced a significant increase in poor mental health as a teenager, culminating in numerous attempts at self-harm and suicidal ideation, including while in secure care, and has been sectioned under the Mental Health Act on many, many occasions. R's traumatic experiences have led to a behaviour that's brought them into contact with the police. He currently has a number of pending criminal matters, almost all relating to alleged offending in their residential care unit. The routine police response has been proceed with arrest, charge and bail without a thorough investigation of whether the complainant wishes to proceed or of whether proceeding with a criminal charge is justified, particularly in light of the framework. Police have threatened to make applications to remand R, despite the innumerable measurable harm which could be caused by this to a highly vulnerable Aboriginal person who makes repeated attempts to commit harm whilst in department care. Members of our cares team have made comments calling police to remove R from the residential care unit because it serves as a circuit breaker and gives R's carers a break from his self-harm attempts. This is not only contrary to the framework on R's health and wellbeing, but indicates a culture of criminalisation within the child protection system. Balit Nalu has provided VALS with the ability to enable children and young people to have a strong voice in their affairs, to be supported to address injustices, and to ensure the state is reminded of its obligation to act as a parent. Self-determination is the only way Aboriginal people will get justice. We're the oldest continuous culture on earth. For the last 230 years, we've had a difficult time. The system right now doesn't work for us, doesn't work for the land, doesn't work for our communities. All we're trying to do is ensure that we can act in a way that self-determines a better future for us. We don't just want a seat at the table or opportunity to consult. We want an ability to self-govern our communities. In conclusion, there's a lot of great work happening at VALS. Sure, it's not fluffy, sure, it's not soft, but it's still important work. And we face these difficult issues head on, and we will continue to do day in, day out. We hope that you want to play a small role by supporting our work. You can go to our website at vals.org.au, look through our public statements. You can sign our petitions for bail reform. You can volunteer your time. And volunteers are an incredible use for us. They've helped us waive more than $1 million worth of fines in one financial year for Aboriginal Victorians suffering domestic violence. You can also make donations, and you can also just amplify your voice through your social media channels, because everybody these days has Facebook. We've spoken a lot about systemic issues that people face today, but I want to remind you that we're strong. My mum was strong. Her mother died when she was 26, but she was still able to self-determine her own future despite the barriers that she received because she was Aboriginal. She told she wasn't going to succeed in education. She did. She was told she would make a positive contribution. She changed the way that palliative care works for Aboriginal people in this state today. She raised a child all by herself after my dad passed early, and I've been able to go on and make those positive contributions. I'm not an exception. There are many more of me, many more of my mother in this community. There are just some in our community that need the most highest help, and we cannot ignore them, not today and not tomorrow. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Narita. That's a lot to absorb, and some very harrowing stories there, of course. So I must say credit to you and the people at the Aboriginal Legal Service who continue that work. We're probably only got time for a couple of quick questions. So was anyone? Colin. Sorry, Colin. Yeah.
May not be quick. Hi there, thank you very much for using the time available so well, and a little bit more as well. You spoke of how there is a disproportionately large number of Indigenous people incarcerated. And that raises the question of whether there's a disproportionately large number of Indigenous people committing offences. And you seem to be suggesting that they commit offences because of the circumstances of their lives, or that we are unjustly arresting people who we would let go if they weren't Indigenous. My question is, what is the way forward? Should we be more tolerant of behaviour which is a problem, or should we be finding the causes of these crimes and dealing with the people there? I spent a lot of time in Western Australia, and they encouraged us on Australia Day to go out and drink wine and watch the fireworks. In Broome, that would be called street drinking, and people would be in strife. So for me, the issue is, how do we respond appropriately to these dreadful facts?
Wonderful question. And when you look at the breakup of crime by Aboriginal offenders, what you will see is that the vast majority of alleged offences relate to summary crime. Because we run the CNS, we're able to see why Aboriginal people are arrested. 80% of our matters month to month relate to possession of drugs for personal use. We also see a large amount related to theft, shop steal, and of course driving offences. So driving without a licence, or most commonly driving an unregistered vehicle because they cannot afford to pay registration. Our higher offences, like indictable offences, are exceedingly rare. They are not common. As to why people steal to put food in their mouths, or often enough it's because they don't have enough income support. We don't have enough housing. Social housing lists are like 40 years in this state. You're dead before you get a house at that rate. When you look at employment and education pathways, we know the situation in Shepparton last year highlighted how pervasive racism is in the schools, and how schools are not well supported to deal with that. So what we need to be making sure is that we're putting all of those supports in social services. That means housing, education and health. That means putting resources into the hands of our teachers so they understand the perspective of First Nations children and the issues that they're confronting and how best they can be supported. It means that also we look at summary crime in a different light. We look at possession of drug use and say, is that something worth criminalising? Or, like public intoxication, is it something that is worthy of a health response? Something that is worthy of allowing people to be supported to address those long-standing issues. Is that?
Thanks very much, Narita. It's a very complex question. It's going to be a topic of discussion over the coming months, of course, with the voice and the referendum and everything. So there'll be plenty of publicity about it, I'm sure, and lots of debate. Thank you very much for coming. We have a small presentation here, which includes a book, I believe, and a pair of socks. 100th anniversary socks, are they, or the convention socks? The convention socks from Phil Endersby, past president, 200% Australian they are. So thank you very much for coming today, and really appreciate your talk, and keep up the great work. We realise how difficult it is. I worked at Fitzroy Legal Service for 20 years, bad enough trying to deal with those issues in our culture, let alone having the cultural overlay and the other issues. So brilliant job, keep up the good work. Thank you. So finally, just thank you all for attending, and thanks also to LMC, past President Peter Dakin, and for reflection from Ruth Carlos Martinez. Next week's guest is Kieran O'Toole, who's Department Director from the Asia Pacific Conciliation Resources, and he's talking about climate change and conflict risks, which is a very relevant topic again in today's environment with all of the increasing world conflict we're seeing at present.